Double knitting boards can make actually very beautiful cables. In this movie, we'll work on one that looks extremely elaborate but is not very difficult at all. This is my cabled slip knot shawl pattern. It utilizes this very cable, and I thought you might like to see a demonstration of how to do it. Of course, you may simply use it to create a scarf or many times going up a blanket, however you want. The cable we're about to do is based on the open braid stitch. So I'm going to review with you the open braid if you don't know it. We're going to call the needle on the end needle 1, the same on each board, and moving across just for clarity. I have a loop of yarn hung on needle 1 on the side closest to myself, and on the side away, 1, 2, 3, 4, the first wrap goes around needle 4. From then on, we wrap across every other, and I've been saying needle, the present day word is peg, so alternating around, always with the offset, counting from here. If this is 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's the one I should wrap around. And if I skip the one after the previous wrap, that's what happens. I'm demonstrating this on a KISS loom set up as a double board because that does work. But the main reason I'm using it is it's the one of my double boards that does not have any work on it right now. And I thought it'd be easier for you to watch the wrap on an empty board. Now, when we get to this end, we've got the offset to deal with. And one other thing I should make you aware of, we can use 24 of these 25 pegs because the open braid stitch works much better as a multiple of 4. So 25 is not 1, 24 is. We need to not leave empty pegs. So did you see what I just did? At the end, I've finished the pattern, and we keep on wrapping until every peg up to the end has been wrapped. Now going back the other way, we begin our offset pattern again. Because of that offset, I don't find that the open braid stitch is the best way to cast on. I usually cast on in stockinette and then begin open braid. Now that business of the offset creates empty pegs on both ends where we don't want them. So after the cast on is created, we get up to the offset by going from peg 1 to peg 1, around peg 1 on my side, around peg 1 on the opposite side, 2 on the opposite side, 3, 4. Now we can begin going every other peg across without leaving gaps at the end. This will have the effect of creating multiple wraps on some of the end pegs, and you just treat them as though they were one stitch, knit all the wraps off over the existing stitch at one time, and it just reinforces the edge. To get as similar as we possibly can on the second side, this is my last wrap in the pattern. I'll go around the end peg, back around the end peg on my side, and do what we did on the first end. Stitch 2, peg 3, back to the end peg. And now when the first empty peg is peg 4, and we can begin resuming the normal pattern. This two-directional wrap every other peg going to the right, then every other going to the left. Oops. Creates one row. So in order to knit what I have here, this would need to be on top of existing stitches. There's nothing to knit over now. And here's something that happens when we get to this end. We have a peg on my side that hasn't been included in the wrap yet, and we take care of that the same way we have been. Actually, that last peg doesn't need wrapping. Now we have 2 wraps on this end, 2 wraps on this end, and multiple wraps on the pegs on my side. It's still not absolutely identical, but it's close enough that it does a good job. Every time we knit a row, this is the way we wrap. If you have found another way to make sure you don't get any gaps and you like it better, that's okay too. The cable takes 12 stitches. It is necessary to have at least 2 stitches on each side of the cable that are not part of the pattern. So I have cast on and begun knitting a swatch on 16 stitches. 6 pairs of those will be involved in the cable. These 2 end pairs were not involved with the cable. There are 6 pairs that are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's easier to think of your stitches in pairs than in singles. For this first row, pair 1 and pair 2 get crossed, and pair 5 and pair 6 get crossed with each other. These end pairs are just edge stitches. They're not involved in the pattern. These crosses get made right over left, meaning the pair that begins on the right moves to the left first. To do that, we need to move the pair on the left out of the way, so we can temporarily sit them on the neighboring pegs. Move the 2 stitches from the right, keep everything in the same order in which it began, rescue the 2 that were on the left and move them to the right. This is pairs 5 and 6. Do the same thing. Move the left ones out of the way. Move the right ones over. Move the left ones to their new position on the right. Very simple. That's what it looks like. Now I will knit 2 rows as I showed you in the open braid stitch, and then we'll do the second cable cross. The 2 rows are knitted. A reminder, these pairs of stitches don't count in the pattern. These pairs are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This time we don't use pair 1 or pair 6. We use pairs 2 and 3 and pairs 4 and 5. And this time we cross the opposite direction. So we'll move the stitches that represent column 3, and we move those that represent column 2 to the right, this time going left over right. Over meaning they are crossed first and replaced on the needles, pegs first. I say needles sometimes because when the Authentic Knitting Board, before it was KB, began, they liked us to refer to the pegs as needles. Now most people have gone to calling it pegs. So sometimes it pops out of my mouth. Cross is complete. Here's what it looks like from the top. It's a good idea to pull down after every row. And you note there is not very much strain on these stitches. time to knit 2 rows, and then we'll do the third cross. 2 more rows have been knitted, and it's time for the third cable cross. Remember, nothing to do with these. Pair 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This time the 2 center pairs, 3 and 4, are crossed. 1, 2, 3. And they go right over left. So we'll move the stitches that are on pair 3. The fourth cable cross that occurs after completing row 8 is exactly like the second cable cross that appears after completing row 4. And that's all there is to this one. So we have completed row 6 of the design, and 2 more rows, and we'll do row 8. Remembering that we think of each pair of stitches as a single column of stitches, and we have 6 columns, we cross column 2 with column 3, working left over right. Left stitches move to their new home first, and column 4 with column 5. Also left over right. We don't do anything at all with columns 1 and column 6. Again, this is just exactly like the second cable cross made after completing row 4. And that's it. It's much simpler than it looks. And these 8 rows complete the cable pattern. We go back after this, we'll knit 2 more rows, and begin again with the first cable cross. Here I am working with the original knitting board, which has a wider space between the rows of pegs than the modern ones do, simply because of wider boards. And you can see the distance between the rows of pegs is substantial. I'm using the 1/2-inch spacer. The shawl pattern may be used on any number of double boards, but you are going to need to have a feature similar to this, in that the length of the stitches across the board is substantial compared to the distance between the pegs. If you find your cable crosses just terribly tight and difficult to make, I think that is probably what is at issue. We need that space across the board to allow the stitches to pivot. The shawl pattern was originally designed for 2 strands of worsted yarn held together and a spacing of 1 inch between the boards, so it goes very fast. If you're using the modern knitting board, I would suggest buying longer bolts and widening the space between the boards and going ahead and using the original pattern rather than trying to work with the narrower space between the boards that the present day board presents. Do check your stitches and rows per inch against the gauge given in the pattern and try to get close. It need not be perfect, but close is important.